The sun dipped low, casting a fiery red hue across the sprawling suburban neighborhood. At the farthest corner of the block, where manicured lawns abruptly met the wild overgrowth of the countryside, stood the farm. A place untouched by the modern world's obsession with perfection, the farm was a vibrant blend of sunflowers, heirloom tomatoes, and clucking chickens, alive with the sounds of nature and the earthy scent of the soil. For Jake and Clara, it was everything they'd ever dreamed of: peace, simplicity, and a return to the land. They spent their mornings in the garden, their hands dirty with the fruits of their labor, and evenings cooking meals with their children around a rustic kitchen table. Life was good, and for a brief moment, it felt like it would always be that way. But that was before Karen. Karen, the infamous HOA board member, had made it her life's mission to maintain order as she saw it. Her perfectly trimmed lawn was a testament to her obsession with conformity, her flower beds as symmetrical as the house she'd spent years perfecting. There was no room for wildflowers or free-range animals in her world. No room for what she considered unsightly messes that disrupted the harmony she believed her suburban paradise deserved. From her pristine window, Karen watched. Every day, she watched the farm thrive. Vibrant vegetables, chickens clucking freely, and the farmhouse growing more charming by the day. Her gaze always lingered just a little too long, and as the days passed, the tension inside her festered. The camera lingers on Karen's narrowed eyes, the reflection of the farm in her window distorting as her fingers tighten around the edge of the curtain. She could barely contain her frustration anymore. The farm was a defiant anomaly in her perfect world, and Karen, being Karen, wouldn't let it stand. She stood up, her movement sharp and precise, her heels clicking with an eerie cadence as she crossed the room. The air was thick with the sound of a clock ticking, each second fueling her building anger. The dark thought crossed her mind: what if this family was ruining the integrity of her neighborhood? Her phone felt like a lifeline, as if the mere act of dialing the police would put her back in control. The oppressive weight of her authority within the HOA had always given her power. She wasn't just Karen from next door. She was Karen, and no one messed with her perfect world. With a click of the phone, she dialed the number. "Hello, this is Karen Brooks. I need to report a violation," she said, her voice cold and calculated. "There's a farm at the edge of the neighborhood, and I believe it's in clear violation of HOA regulations." Her lips twisted into a smile. "They've got chickens running loose and plants growing all over the place. It's an eyesore." The camera focuses on the growing unease in Karen's face as the operator asks if she's sure about the allegations. She presses forward, convinced this was the right move, convinced she was the one who could bring order back. Her voice quivered slightly as she added, "The property values are at risk. Something needs to be done. Now." Cut to the farm. Jake and Clara are in the garden, oblivious to the storm that's beginning to brew just a few streets away. The peaceful clucking of chickens fills the air, and the children run through the rows of sweet corn. Their world is serene, but as the camera zooms in on the rustling leaves, a chilling breeze seems to whisper through the trees, an ominous hint that something is about to disrupt their peace. Cut to Karen, phone still in hand, eyes gleaming with the certainty that this was just the first step in reclaiming her perfect world. In the distance, a police car's siren begins to wail. The screech of tires echoed through the quiet neighborhood as a police car pulled onto the dirt driveway of the farm. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the patchwork of gardens and vegetable rows. Jake and Clara looked up from their task, wiping sweat from their brows, as two officers stepped out of the car, their boots crunching against the gravel. The officers exchanged glances, clearly puzzled by the serene beauty of the farm. Neither of them expected to find a problem here. The chickens clucked softly in the background, and Clara bent down to pick a handful of sunflowers, their bright yellow petals swaying gently in the evening breeze. Jake stood tall, watching the officers approach with curiosity. Clara, ever calm, straightened up and greeted them with a warm smile. "Can I help you, officers?" Jake asked, wiping his hands on his jeans, his voice friendly yet firm. One of the officers, Officer Thompson, was the first to speak. His eyes scanned the property, clearly uncertain of what he was looking for. "We received a complaint," he began, his tone neutral but a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "Somebody reported a violation of neighborhood codes. Apparently, this farm has chickens running around, and well, it doesn't fit the usual look of the area." Clara's smile didn't falter, though there was an edge to it now. "This is our home. We're just living the way we want to." She waved her hand toward the chickens clucking happily in the yard. "We've had chickens for months, and as for our garden, well, it's all organic. We're just trying to grow food for our family." Jake stepped forward. "There's no violation. Everything's within the law. You can check if you like." The camera shifts between Jake and Clara's determined expressions, their postures upright and unapologetic. They were calm, collected, and resolved, as if they had anticipated this moment for weeks. The officers exchanged glances, uncertain of how to respond. Officer Thompson scratched the back of his neck. "I got to be honest, I'm not sure what to do here. It's not like we've got a law specifically against having chickens." "Exactly," Clara said, a small smile forming on her lips. "We're just a family trying to live sustainably." The second officer, Officer Reed, stood back, his arms folded. He was quiet, scanning the scene. The sight of the farm was almost too peaceful, a stark contrast to the artificial, cookie-cutter suburbia that surrounded it. "Look, we'll need to check with the HOA on this," Officer Thompson finally said, taking out his phone to make the call. The camera zooms in on Jake's clenched jaw as he watches the officers huddle together to make the call. A cloud of doubt begins to form. This wasn't just about chickens anymore. It was about something deeper, something more personal. Jake had a gut feeling that Karen wasn't going to stop at this. In the distance, the gentle rustling of the leaves carried an almost foreboding tone, as if the trees themselves were whispering of the storm that was about to break. After a brief conversation on the phone, the officers hung up and turned back to Jake and Clara. Officer Thompson's voice was now less sure, his words carrying a note of hesitation. "We've confirmed that there's nothing illegal here, but we'll have to issue a warning. The HOA insists that you're violating some kind of neighborhood agreement. They want this situation resolved soon." The tension thickens in the air, the weight of Karen's shadow hanging over them. Jake's gaze hardened. The officers were just doing their job, but he knew this wasn't going away. Karen's words still echoed in his mind. Something needs to be done. Now. The officers left, their car rolling slowly down the long dirt driveway. Clara glanced at Jake, and without a word, they both knew what was coming. The camera lingers on the fading police car, its red and blue lights flashing in the growing darkness. Behind it, the farm stands resolute, bathed in the last light of day. But beneath the peaceful surface, the tension is palpable. There was no going back now. The next morning, a heavy silence hung in the air as the sun climbed slowly over the horizon, bathing the farm in a soft, golden light. It was a new day, but for Jake and Clara, the feeling of peace had been replaced with an underlying tension, a whisper of something dark just beyond their reach. The distant sound of a rooster crowing broke the stillness, a reminder of their quiet existence. But just a few blocks away, Karen had already woken up, and the wheels of her relentless pursuit were turning once more. Her house, as immaculate as always, sat like a fortress at the end of the street, the blinds drawn tight as she fumed, pacing back and forth, her thoughts consuming her. The camera lingers on Karen's face, her brow furrowed with determination. She could feel the weight of her mission pressing down on her chest. The police hadn't done what she wanted. The HOA was still dragging its feet, but she knew there was one thing that could make this all go away: the law. With a snap of her fingers, she grabbed the phone from the counter, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed a number she had memorized. The phone rang, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, a voice picked up on the other end. "Yes, "This is Karen Brooks. I need to report a violation," she said, her voice dripping with authority. There was no hesitation now. "It's that farm at the edge of the neighborhood. The one with the chickens. They're disturbing the peace, and I believe they're violating zoning laws." Cut to the farm. Jake and Clara were in the barn, sorting through a basket of fresh eggs, unaware that Karen was once again orchestrating her next move. They had learned to shrug off the small annoyances, the sideways glances from neighbors, the whispering behind closed doors. But something about this felt different. It wasn't just about a few complaints anymore. They could feel the storm on the horizon. The camera pans to the mailbox, where a letter sat quietly, waiting. The next piece of the puzzle. Jake noticed it as they headed back toward the house, his hand brushing against the rough wooden fence that surrounded their property. He reached into the mailbox, pulling out the letter with the same casual air he always had. But as his fingers slid across the paper, his stomach dropped. His eyes scanned the text quickly, the words leaping off the page as if they had a life of their own. The camera zooms in on Jake's face, his expression shifting from casual to alarmed. Clara, standing behind him, felt the change in the air. She stepped closer, reading over his shoulder. "It's from the HOA," Jake muttered, his voice low. "And Karen's at it again. She's filed an official complaint." Clara's breath caught in her throat. They'd expected this, of course, but the reality of it felt like a slap. The camera pulls back, showing the two of them standing together in front of the farmhouse, the wind picking up just enough to make the leaves rustle ominously. The peacefulness of their world seemed like an illusion now. The visual of the letter, stark and official, only heightened the sense of impending doom. With a sigh, Jake crumpled the letter in his hand, tossing it to the side. "This is getting ridiculous. She won't stop until we're out of here." Clara shook her head, her eyes steely. "We're not going anywhere." The camera zooms in on Clara's face, capturing her resolve. There was fire in her eyes now, a fire fueled by the relentless pursuit of someone who couldn't stand seeing others live freely. This wasn't just about chickens. This was about control. And she wasn't going to let Karen, or anyone else, take that away. As the wind swirled around them, the distant sound of sirens echoed through the air, growing louder. The suspense builds, the camera following the sirens as they approached the farm from a distance. Jake and Clara exchanged a glance, but neither of them moved. They knew what was coming next, and they were ready to face it head-on. Then, just as the police car turned the corner, something unexpected happened. The camera shifts quickly to the sight of a neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, walking down the driveway toward the farm. She held a stack of papers in her hands. The suspense is palpable as Mrs. Thompson steps closer, her gaze flickering nervously. She looked over her shoulder before handing the papers to Clara. "They're with you," Mrs. Thompson said quietly, before quickly retreating back down the driveway. Clara opened the envelope to find a petition with signatures from nearly every neighbor in support of their farm. The words "Support Local Farms" were written boldly across the top. The camera zooms in on Clara's face as her eyes widen with relief, her grip tightening on the petition. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a lifeline. The sun hung high in the sky, its scorching heat reflecting the simmering tension that had begun to permeate the neighborhood. Across the street from Jake and Clara's farm, the lawn of Karen's pristine home stood like a battlefield in the making, every blade of grass meticulously trimmed, each flower perfectly arranged in a rainbow of unnatural symmetry. Inside her house, however, the world was anything but ordered. The camera focuses on Karen's clenched fist, resting on the dining room table as she seethed, her eyes flicking back and forth from the letter she'd received. Her complaint about the farm being officially escalated, to the newspaper clippings of neighborhood events pinned to her corkboard. Her face was a mask of fury, but behind her cold eyes, there was a flicker of doubt. Karen had always been a force in the HOA, a symbol of control, but something had changed. The neighbors weren't lining up behind her this time. Across the street, the gentle rustling of trees, the distant hum of cicadas, and the soft laughter of children playing on the farm marked a stark contrast. The camera zooms in on the petition that Clara now proudly holds in her hands. It's a small piece of paper, but to her, it feels like the weight of the world, a weapon forged from unity, a challenge thrown at the feet of the HOA and Karen herself. Clara looked at Jake, her expression unreadable for a moment. "We're not alone in this," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of realization. Jake nodded, his jaw tight. He stepped outside, holding the petition high, his gaze sweeping the horizon. A group of neighbors was gathering by the farm's wooden fence. The word was spreading fast. This wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about the heart of their community, about standing up for something that felt real in a world that increasingly felt fake. The camera pans across the neighbors, each one with a different story, but all bound by one common belief. They weren't going to let Karen control their lives anymore. Mr. Thompson, a retired veteran, stood at the edge of the fence, his eyes scanning the scene with a deep, measured intensity. "We've got your back," he said, his voice steady, cutting through the growing hum of the gathering crowd. "We're tired of the HOA pushing everyone around." Mrs. Peterson, a mother of 3 and local schoolteacher, joined him, holding her youngest in her arms. "It's time we take a stand for local farming," she said, her eyes sparkling with determination. "Our kids need to know where food comes from, not just that it comes from the grocery store." The camera shifts between the faces of the crowd, each neighbor's gaze filled with quiet determination. There were no shouts, no grand speeches, just the steady murmur of everyday people rising up for what they believed was right. Their support was quiet, but undeniable, and with each passing moment, Karen's once unquestioned influence began to falter. The camera catches Clara's smile, a soft, knowing smile, as she watches the crowd gather. She had feared they might be isolated in this fight. But now, standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who had once been mere neighbors, she felt an overwhelming sense of hope. The visual of the growing crowd, the way they melded together into one collective force, conveyed a sense of unity stronger than anything Karen could muster. Jake looked toward the street, his eyes narrowing as he noticed Karen's figure standing in her window, watching them with an expression that was part disbelief, part simmering anger. The camera zooms in on Karen's face, showing the deepening frustration as she watched her neighbors defy her in front of her own eyes. But she wasn't done yet. No, Karen had more up her sleeve. The camera pulls back slowly, showing the farm's peaceful grounds, now alive with voices, laughter, and the subtle rustling of paper as the petition continued to circulate. The town was changing, and Karen could feel it slipping through her fingers. Without warning, a sharp, shrill noise pierced the air. The sound of an official HOA meeting announcement. A red-faced Karen had made one final call. This fight wasn't over. The once serene and quiet neighborhood was now a battleground of whispered conversations, hushed meetings, and clandestine glances. The camera zooms in on Karen's clenched fists as she furiously drafts yet another letter, her face a mask of simmering rage. The walls of her home, once a fortress of control, felt as if they were closing in on her. Her carefully constructed world of perfectly trimmed lawns and uniformity was crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of the rising tide of defiance. Cut to Jake and Clara standing on their porch, the petition still fresh in their hands. The crowd of neighbors, now swelling in number, had gathered outside their home once again. They weren't just visitors now. They were a collective force, united against the oppressive rule of the HOA and Karen's relentless need for control. It was no longer about chickens or gardens. This was about their right to exist freely, to live a life unburdened by the stifling rules of an HOA designed to suffocate individuality. The soft hum of the crowd grew louder as more neighbors arrived, their faces a blend of determination and excitement. Some carried homemade signs reading, "Support local farmers," and "Down with HOA tyranny." It was clear that the people had spoken. The winds of change had arrived, and Karen was about to feel its full force. The camera cuts to Karen, standing rigid in her front yard, her gaze locked onto the growing crowd. A cold smile slowly spread across her face, but there was something darker behind it. A spark of fury, something that hinted she wasn't just angry anymore. She was planning her counterattack. The camera focuses on Karen's eyes, narrowing with focus as she marched into her house, slamming the door behind her. She reached for her phone with practiced efficiency, dialing the one number she hoped would give her the upper hand. The HOA president, Mr. Hamilton. The connection was immediate, his voice on the other end too familiar. "Mr. Hamilton," Karen began, her tone low, but with a steel edge that could cut glass. "The farm is escalating. They've rallied the whole neighborhood against us. I need action. I can't allow this chaos to continue." On the other side of the line, Mr. Hamilton's voice was slow, measured. "We're not sure how much power we have over this situation anymore, Karen. It's bigger than we thought." But Karen wasn't listening. The camera zooms in on her face, her eyes wide with determination as her voice hardened. "No, we can't lose control. We need to hit them where it hurts. It's time to bring in the lawyers." Cut to the farm, where Jake was speaking with Mr. Thompson, who was now the unofficial leader of the neighborhood resistance. The crowd had settled into a quiet hum, their attention focused on the growing energy that was palpable in the air. "Karen won't give up," Jake said, his voice low but firm. "She's going to take this to the next level. We need to be ready for anything." Mr. Thompson nodded. "And we will be. But you're not in this alone. We'll stand with you, no matter what." Just as the final word left Mr. Thompson's mouth, the sound of a distant siren broke the air. The camera zooms out, showing the slowly approaching red and blue lights that cast eerie shadows across the street. The sense of foreboding was undeniable now. Whatever was coming, it was close. Cut to Karen, standing at the window of her house, watching as the police sirens grew louder. The camera pans down to her hand clutching the phone. Its screen cracked under the pressure of her grip. It was clear that she wasn't going down without a fight. The question now was, who would be the last one standing? The sun was now beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, foreboding shadows over the farm. The air was thick with tension, the scent of freshly cut grass mingling with the distant crackle of tension that seemed to radiate from every corner of the neighborhood. Jake and Clara stood on their porch, watching the growing sea of cars lining the street, their headlights flickering like a gathering storm. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves were now united, standing together in the face of an unseen enemy. But the calm before the storm would not last long. The camera pans to a sleek black car, its tinted windows hiding the faces of those inside. It rolled slowly up the dirt driveway, its tires crunching against the gravel with deliberate precision. Jake's gaze hardened as he saw the car, knowing that what was coming next would not be easily handled. "Clara," he murmured, his voice tight. "It's here. She's brought in the lawyers." Clara didn't need to ask who she was. The darkened windows of the car were enough of a clue. This wasn't just an escalation. It was war. The high-powered, legal war that would pit their small farm against the relentless, calculated power of Karen and the HOA. The camera cuts to the inside of the black car, where a pair of sharp eyes gleamed behind dark sunglasses, a briefcase resting on the passenger seat. The doors of the car opened with a precise click, and two men in expensive suits stepped out. One was tall, with a thin face and a professional air that screamed of expensive law school training. The other was shorter, broader, his features sharp with a hint of aggression. The tall one, Mr. Collins, adjusted his tie as he walked toward the porch, his heels clicking sharply against the gravel, a reminder of the cold, calculating nature of the world he came from. He extended a hand to Jake, his grip firm but cold. "Mr. Turner, I presume," he said, his voice clipped. "I'm here on behalf of the HOA. We have received numerous complaints about your lifestyle choices. I believe you are aware that the HOA has the power to impose significant fines, and in extreme cases, legal action can be taken." Jake held Mr. Collins' gaze, his hand firm as he shook the lawyer's hand. But inside, a storm was brewing. They had expected this, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. "I'm well aware of your authority," Jake replied, his voice low and steady. "But I don't think you have any power here. You'll need more than a legal letter to get us off this land." The camera shifts focus, catching Clara's expression as she stepped forward, her eyes sharp with the same defiance that had brought them this far. "We've done nothing wrong. We're within our rights to live as we see fit, and we're not backing down." Mr. Collins' lips curled into a thin smile, but it was devoid of warmth. "You misunderstand, Ms. Turner. We're not here to negotiate. We're here to make sure the HOA's wishes are enforced, one way or another." The tension between them was palpable, the camera focusing on Jake's clenched jaw, the muscle in his neck tightening. He knew this wasn't going to be resolved with a few words. This was going to take everything they had, every ounce of will, every piece of evidence that they could muster. The camera cuts to the second lawyer, the one with the aggressive posture, his eyes darting around the property, as if sizing it up. "We've already filed the paperwork for the injunction," he said gruffly. "If you don't comply, the courts will intervene." The weight of the words hung in the air, the silent threat looming larger than ever. The camera zooms in on Clara, her expression unwavering. She wasn't afraid, but she could feel the gravity of the situation pressing in. Just then, a sound broke the stillness, the unmistakable hum of more cars approaching. The camera cuts to the street where more of the neighbors were arriving, their vehicles pulling up in a quiet but resolute show of solidarity. There were no speeches, no chants, just people standing together, the hum of unity growing louder, a physical manifestation of the strength they shared. The camera zooms back to the lawyers, their expressions shifting from calculated confidence to subtle unease. They had expected this to be an easy victory, but there was something in the air now, something they couldn't quite put their finger on. Before they could say another word, Mr. Collins' phone buzzed, his expression tightening as he read the screen. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, turning back to the car. The camera pulls back slowly, showing the two lawyers retreating toward their black car, the neighbors standing tall and resolute behind Jake and Clara. The battle had only just begun, and though the lawyers had the law on their side, Jake and Clara had something far more powerful: the unity of their community. The day had arrived. The courtroom loomed before Jake and Clara, a towering structure of glass and steel that seemed almost as imposing as the battle they were about to face. They stood at the entrance, a moment of stillness hanging in the air, the weight of what was to come pressing heavily on their shoulders. The camera lingers on their faces, capturing the quiet determination in their eyes, the resolve that had built up over weeks of escalating tension. Inside, the echo of footsteps reverberated down the long, sterile hallway as lawyers, plaintiffs, and defendants alike prepared for the showdown that would determine the fate of the farm and the future of the neighborhood. Clara's hand gripped Jake's tightly, a silent promise between them that they would not back down. The camera shifts inside the courtroom, its cold, polished floors reflecting the intense spotlight on the case. The jury sat silently in the jury box, their faces unreadable, while the judge, a stern, middle-aged woman with graying hair, adjusted her glasses as she surveyed the room. The bailiff called the court to order, and the tension in the room tightened, like a drum about to burst. Jake and Clara stood, their hearts pounding as they faced the opposing side. Karen, of course, sitting smugly in the front row, her lawyer at her side, flanked by Mr. Collins. The opposing side radiated confidence, their polished appearances and calm demeanor giving off the sense that they had already won. But the camera zooms in on Jake and Clara's faces, their unwavering expressions a silent declaration that they weren't about to lose without a fight. "Your Honor," Mr. Collins began, his voice smooth and calculated as he stood to make his opening argument. "We are here today because the defendants, Jake and Clara Turner, have flagrantly violated multiple community regulations. Their decision to operate a farm within this residential neighborhood complete with livestock and unsightly structures, is a direct violation of HOA codes. It is disturbing the peace and negatively impacting property values. The words hung in the air like a bitter chill, but Jake didn't flinch. The camera cuts to Clara, her eyes locked on the judge as she prepared herself for the moment when she would speak. Every inch of her, from the tight set of her jaw to the calm steadiness of her posture, spoke of unshakable resolve. "Your Honor," Clara said, standing as the judge nodded for her to proceed. "This isn't just about zoning laws or property values. It's about the right to live freely, to grow our food, to raise our animals, and to build a life that reflects who we are. Our farm is an expression of that freedom. We followed every rule, every regulation that the HOA has set forth. And more importantly, we've done something that this community needs. We've brought life back to a neighborhood that was dying from stagnation. People have come together, and our farm has given them a reason to care about each other again." The camera pans to the jury, their eyes focused intently on Clara as her words cut through the air. There was something in the air now, a shift, as if the weight of her argument was starting to sink in. But just as the momentum was beginning to shift, a sound echoed from the back of the courtroom, sharp, like a gunshot in the silence. Karen stood up, her voice dripping with feigned indignation. "This is nonsense," she cried. "They're ruining everything we've worked so hard to build. Their actions are irresponsible, and they're a threat to our entire neighborhood. You can't let them get away with this. If you do, what's next? People setting up shops in their garages, turning this neighborhood into a circus." The camera zooms in on Karen's face, her expression twisted in outrage, but the faintest tremor in her hand betrayed the fear simmering underneath. She could feel the control slipping from her fingers. Jake's fists clenched, but before he could respond, Clara stepped forward, her voice calm and steady, but with the power of an entire community behind it. "Your Honor, the only circus here is the one that Karen's trying to create. This isn't about an HOA rulebook. This is about people. Real people who are standing together against someone who thinks they can dictate how we live, who we are, and what we believe in." The courtroom fell silent. The camera holds on Clara's face, capturing the raw intensity of the moment. There was a fire in her eyes now, and it burned brighter than ever before. The camera shifts between Karen and the jury, their expressions now uncertain. The jury's gaze flickered back and forth, clearly unsettled by Clara's impassioned defense. The tide was turning, slowly but surely, and with every word that Clara spoke, Karen's grip on the situation loosened just a little more. But just as the jury seemed to shift in the farm's favor, a sharp, unexpected interruption sliced through the tension. A ringing phone. It wasn't just any phone. It was Karen's, sitting at her lawyer's desk, her lawyer's hand trembling as he answered it. The camera zooms in on the phone, the faintest flicker of uncertainty in the lawyer's eyes as he listened. Then the phone was set down with a decisive thud. "We've just received new evidence," he said coldly, his eyes shifting toward the judge. "A third-party inspector has reported irregularities in the farm's construction, illegal structures that violate code." The suspense thickens as the judge's eyes narrowed, and the room filled with the unmistakable sound of tension winding tighter. This fight wasn't over yet. The courtroom was heavy with tension, the kind of stillness that fills the air before a storm hits. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the judge, whose gavel hovered in the air. The battle lines had been drawn, and Jake, Clara, Karen, and the entire community were waiting on the edge of their seats for the final word. The camera cuts to Karen, her eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a tight, almost imperceptible sneer. Behind her, her lawyer, Mr. Collins, stood stiff, his hands clasped in front of him, awaiting the inevitable. But despite her outward composure, a tiny flicker of unease danced in Karen's eyes. She had played her cards, but the game wasn't over yet. The camera shifts to Jake and Clara, standing side by side, their hands clasped tightly together. Clara's jaw was clenched, her expression set with determination, while Jake's brow furrowed, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. They had fought long and hard for this moment, and they weren't about to let it slip away. The community was behind them, but there was still the final hurdle, the judge's decision. The judge, a woman with steely gray eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, finally brought the gavel down with a sharp crack that resonated through the room like a thunderclap. "Order in the court," she said, her voice firm and commanding. She looked over the evidence one last time, her eyes briefly flicking from Jake and Clara to Karen and her team. It was the kind of gaze that saw through everything, weighing every word, every action. The camera zooms in on the judge's face, her gaze calculating, cold but fair. The room was so silent you could hear the faintest rustling of papers. After what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. Having reviewed all of the evidence presented, the testimonies, and the allegations made by both sides, she began, her voice steady. "I have come to a decision." She paused, her eyes locking with Clara's. The weight of those words hung in the air like an unbearable pressure. The camera holds on Clara's face, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. Was this the moment of victory, or would Karen's relentless pursuit tear their dream apart? "The court finds in favor of the Turners and their farm," the judge declared, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "The HOA's complaints are found to be based on personal grievances, not substantiated facts or legal violations. The Turners have the right to operate their farm and to live freely within this community. The HOA's request for an injunction is hereby denied." A collective breath of relief swept through the courtroom like a wave, the air suddenly lighter, as though a storm had passed. The camera captures the instant of shock and disbelief on Karen's face, her mouth agape as she tried to comprehend the verdict. This was not the outcome she had prepared for, not the outcome she had demanded. For a moment, the room was filled with hushed murmurs. But then, one by one, the members of the jury stood and nodded in agreement. Their faces were stoic, but there was a shared understanding in their movements. They had chosen the side of freedom, of community over control. The camera pans across the faces of Jake and Clara, their eyes locking, both of them standing a little taller, the weight of the battle finally lifting from their shoulders. A smile tugged at the corners of Clara's lips, and Jake let out a long, relieved breath. They had won. Against all odds, against Karen's relentless pursuit of power, they had prevailed. But just as the relief began to settle in, a sudden, sharp voice interrupted the moment. Karen stood abruptly, her face a mask of fury. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You can't get away with this. I'll make sure of it." The camera focuses on Karen's face, her expression wild and dangerous as she stood before the judge. But the gavel came down with a swift and decisive motion. "Enough," the judge said firmly. "This case is closed. Any further actions on your part will be dealt with accordingly. Court is adjourned." The camera zooms out, capturing the room in its entirety. The defeated Karen, standing alone in the middle of the courtroom, her face contorted with rage. In contrast, Jake and Clara stood surrounded by their neighbors, their arms raised in triumph as the courtroom doors opened, releasing them from the tense atmosphere that had held them captive for so long. The neighborhood had won, not just the farm, but the soul of the community. And as they walked out of the courtroom together, hand in hand, they knew they had done something that could never be taken away, proving that no matter the odds, a united community could overcome any challenge.